Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at BTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is with reference to the President's address to the Parliament, where Mr. Asif Ali Zardari has spoken about a number of issues, including the decisions with regards to making more canals from the Indus River. And this is, of course, something that he has said in conjunction with what has happened before, also in terms of discussions between the PPP and the PMLN, and has talked about how this can cause pressure on the Federation, has also said that this is something that needs to be abandoned and needs to be considered with consensus of all the political parties and parliamentarians, something that of course affects the provinces and is going to be an impactful decision forward. Adding to that, of course, he talked about other important issues and key areas, including of course better governance and the economic policies, also with regards to law and order situation and terrorism, and the call for unity on key issues that affect the government and its national interests. What does that mean in terms of the way that it's going to be actually perceived by the Parliament? And of course, the government is important, in particular, of course, the stance that has been taken between the PPP and PMLN, while of course, in terms of the ruckus that has also been witnessed today in the Parliament from the opposition parties, what exactly can be done with the call for unity that the President is referring to? That is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a look at what is going on in terms of the economic conditions of the country, with the State Bank deciding to, of course, maintain the policy rate at 12%, something perhaps a little bit different from what experts and analysts were expecting. But this is, of course, in conjunction with the kind of numbers that we've seen in terms of inflation as well, and the fact that there needs to be, of course, a trajectory towards the positive direction, and whether or not those indicators are in fact stable enough for the policy rate to be changed. So we're going to be taking a look in depth in terms of the various aspects behind this particular decision and what needs to be done moving forward and what can be expected. And that is going to be our focus in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, and we've also been joined online by Dr. Niaz Murtaza, a senior political analyst. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the show. And Dr. Niaz, I'm going to start with you with what has happened in the Parliament today with, of course, the President addressing for the 8th time. He has spoken about a number of key issues, including, of course, economy, governance, terrorism, and the call for unity. And this is, of course, really, really important in terms of how we have seen the current political situation. But in particular, he has mentioned the issues with canals, something that has been discussed previously between the PPP and PMLN as well, and has talked about how this can cause pressure on the Federation. And I want your take on that in terms of what such a stance or such articulation actually means, particularly coming from the President and the Parliament, and then, of course, how is it reflective of the relations between the PMLN and PPP?
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. So in a way, we've had two shocks or two unexpected things, the economic shock of, the State Bank not reducing the interest rate, and the political equivalent of that of, the President, mentioning a few contentious issues, because, normally presidential elections, presidential speeches in the Parliament, joint speech houses, are normally, fairly supportive of, the policies that the government is saying, especially when it is a president that has been elected by the same coalition. That's the important thing. If there is an opposition president, obviously, then, you can expect anything. But the fact that, this is a president that was, elected with PMLN support, so even, the few words that he mentioned did cause, some surprise. Now, obviously, he did praise, the government on so many issues, on, handling of the economy, this, that, etc. But then, he did raise, a couple of issues. And what's interesting is that, he raised those specific issues which are of concern to the PPP. I mean, there are hundred of, national issues that he could have pointed out about, the situation in Balochistan, in ex-FATA terrorism, but he deliberately spoke about two issues which are near and dear to the PPP. Now, obviously, he's, originally from the PPP, but then he's also, the president of Pakistan, who has resigned from his membership of PPP. So, you need to look at what's been happening between the two parties over the past few months there have been issues simmering between the two. There was the issue of sharing of power in Punjab, and now this more recent issue of the canal. So what had been happening was that the criticism of PMLN was coming more from, say, people like Bilawal, who obviously is the chairperson of PPP. So if it comes from him, that's fine. And then the more junior leaders of PPP, especially from Punjab, whereas Mr. Zardari, from what you hear from the media, was playing a sort of conciliatory role, keeping PPP a bit quiet, helping both of them come together. And that strategy did not work. So now there has been this new strategy where even Mr. Zardari has raised those issues. And there's two big bones of contention. One is the share in Punjab government. There I tend to agree with the PMLN position. What the media suggests is that Maryam Nawaz Sharif is trying to manage a coalition based on merit and rational decision making, not giving too much role to the M&A pressures and so on. So I think that's a good trend in Pakistani politics. And if she's not doing it for her own M&As, then PPP should certainly not object to it. The other issue is, of course, about the canal, and there, I tend to agree with the PPP position of several reasons, environmental issues, political issues, private sector involvement, then, equity issues. There does seem to be, things that need to be improved on, the Green Pakistan initiative. There might be environmental damage because of, the very brittle environment of Cholistan, the impact on the lower level users in Sindh, the fact that you could have given that same land to landless people and have them develop some kind of sustainable agriculture. There are various options available of drip irrigation, underground irrigation systems, rather than using the canal water coming down. There's huge reservoirs of water below the river beds that could have been extracted, and then it should have been handled by landless farmers instead of a state element handling it and trying to do large scale corporate farming, which does have a lot of environmental issues in such brittle environments. So it's that, but then there was also a lot of praise. So I would say this is just like a warning shot to see what the reaction would be, whether given the fact that the president himself has raised the issue now, who was the last person within PPP who was supportive of PMLN. So I think they'll wait to see what impact it has on PMLN, whether it shows some flexibility, and then the PPP will then decide its future course of action. But then I don't expect any radical immediately radical action immediately.
Right, absolutely. Faisal, I want your take on that as well, particularly in terms of what Dr. Niaz pointed out as to what a president, somebody in the role or the capacity as president can or cannot say, or should not say, and what is the political diplomacy around it in terms of what is being addressed, and whether or not the number of key issues raised by the president were the most important ones and were actually the priority. And then add to that also in the ways in which that will actually influence the government. A presidential address in general, the power that it holds in the parliament, and then of course that coming in from the PPP given what has been going on recently.
Yes, and obviously when we talk about President Asif Ali Zardari's, of course, today's addresser, it is, it of course shows that, many of the aspects which were highlighted, they are to be highlighted in the parliament, and they are already being highlighted in the parliament. When it comes to, of course, fighting against the terrorism, yes, it was highlighted, and parliament is doing everything to, of course, focus on that, and many other aspects related to governance. He has highlighted that governance needs to be improved. When we talk about the job creation, he has highlighted this, because he can simply say that the youth bulge of Pakistan is seeking the opportunities, and them opportunities, evidently, of course, it is the job of the government to provide them and with the environment where all of the opportunities are being created for the youth bulge of Pakistan, and of course many other aspects which he has already highlighted. They were very important, but one aspect which he has highlighted, I think he as Dr. Niaz has rightly pointed out, that he is not part of a political party, Pakistan People's Party right now, but of course he knows that his former political party, Pakistan People's Party, is known for of course his leadership and his leadership skills as well. In the recent past, of course, Pakistan People's Party, it was known to have his impact on the party. And when we talk about their vote bank, of course their vote bank is in one particular province, and that is Sindh province, and they believe that somehow, of course, they have to keep their vote bank intact, and they very well know the situation on the ground. People of Sindh, they have reservations on this, and that is why he was highlighting these reservations. Overall, I believe whenever these decisions were being made, as we know that the government is a coalition government, all of the parties that are part of this government, they were on board, and they were, of course, given the reasons of these canals as well. One of them reasons which I have always come across is, of course, Pakistan is a country with the climate change, with the environmental changes. Of course, we are seeing the floods, and these floods mainly they are focused on one river, and that is Indus River. And eventually what happens is, every year we keep on wasting our water from the Indus right into the sea, and rather than wasting it, it is better to have the further canals wherever it is possible to irrigate more and more areas of Pakistan. I'm intentionally using the word Pakistan because when it comes to Indus River does not belong to one province, it belongs to whole Pakistan. And to me, I think when we talk about wastage of water, it's better to have these canals. When it comes to when to open these canals to have the water in, or when not to, whether it is required somewhere else, because if these canals are there, then there is a mechanism of passing the water through these canals. Whenever there will be a need of course diverting these waters to not letting it get into the sea straight away, then I'm pretty much sure that the irrigation departments of Pakistan and the people who are experts in this field, they will of course give their own recommendations that this is the year that we have to actually get this water into these canals, so that we don't end up losing this water or wasting it. And to me, I think this sort of mechanism, it is agreed upon by the parties because there are genuine justifications for it. And if somebody is, of course, as the President of Pakistan is highlighting, that has everything to do with, of course, the reservations that are being shown by the people of Sindh, and of course the different constituencies, they will be feeling that they might get neglected in terms of the water share they want to have in their area. So that is why he has been highlighting this. Overall, the speech was excellent. I was of course watching it, and the kind of response it was getting from the opposition benches. Of course, opposition benches, rather than listening it properly, they have been continuously raising the slogans against the government and raising the slogans in the favor of their former chief, the PTI's chief. And in the midst of these slogans, of course, many of the including President himself, Prime Minister himself, and many of others, they were getting irritated, but at the same time there was no stoppage in terms of the speech deliverance. And I think overall that speech covered everything. The challenges which are being faced by Pakistan, they were covered by it. And most important, which was of course highlighted by the President of Pakistan, and that was related to when it comes to economy, when it comes to politics in the Pakistan, there needs to be consensus, and we have time and again highlighted in our show that Pakistan requires that political and economic consensus, and that has been of course highlighted by President of Pakistan as well, that this is a time of the hour, need of the hour, that we have to have the consensus when it comes to economy and when it comes to politics.
Right. And Farrukh, I want your take on, of course, what you made of the speech as well, but add to that in terms of the value that it actually holds in the parliament and by the parliamentarians and of course, the federation to which he referred to as well. Because while at the end of the day, we can argue whether the issue was important or not, whether it was a PPP-centric issue or not, what really is the value of these words that were said in the parliament by the president? Will they have any impact? Are they taken seriously for those they were meant for?
Wow. I think that you can read my mind. I was just thinking, please don't go there, please don't go there, and you went there. Look, right off the bat, let me spell out a few caveats, right? First one is I am less inclined to criticize President Zardari. Why? Because I know it for, from experience that he has a long memory, and his people around him actually hold a grudge. When he was president, the last time we used to frequent the presidency quite often. After that, other presidents also kept going in the same manner. But something I did during PTI's time perhaps is not forgotten. So I haven't met him once since he became president. So I will be more watchful and try not to actually go there, so to speak. But your question is very important. Remember that president, when it comes to, our bicameral, legislature, if you want to, you can say it is essentially a tricameral system where the third chamber belongs to the president, right? A president is part of the parliament itself. So this is why, and because he is also head of federation, every year, whenever the new parliamentary year is starting, or whenever he wants, he addresses the parliament. And as President of Pakistan, as the head of federation, of course, he is going to highlight the federation-related issues. Usually, and it is sometimes ironic that when presidents actually deliver the speech, they talk about the government as my government, right? Usually what happens is that Pakistan's politics, whatever it is, prime ministers or governments keep changing and presidents are left behind by the previous party. So they end up actually calling the new government that might be their opponents my government as well. Now, what exactly is the impact? I think that the system is so designed that the president's office is mainly ceremonial. It is mostly a post office, right, or rubber stamp, so to speak. So usually it is thought to be that way, but because People's Party is also a partner in the federal government and not in the cabinet, but they are part of the federal coalition. Because of that, he has some heft. Now, I'm glad that Dr. Saab actually spoke about this perceptive, binary within the party, the politics of Asif Ali Zardari and politics of his son, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, when it comes to PMLN, is considered to be a hawk, and President Zardari is considered to be a dove regarding that. That's why he ended up there, because initially we hear that Bilawal Bhutto Zardari did not want to support the government without actually government accepting certain condition. So the question is, if President Zardari is troubled by something and he wants the coalition to end, can he do it? Or for that matter, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari can do that. If the party is really divided, then there is no chance that that will happen, because then the government can always leverage on this divide. But regarding the overall situation, the so-called friction between People's Party and PMLN, remember that these are two parties which have learnt in the past that whenever they join hands, they both suffer. And their popularity went down in the early days of democratic revival after General Pervez Musharraf as well, and that's why they continue to keep on clashing all the time. Now, is this true that these two parties are at loggerheads, or this is only to appeal to their bases? PMLN has a stronghold, or it was, they say that it is their stronghold, and that is Punjab. People's Party has its stronghold in rural Sindh. So now the question is that whenever People's Party wants to get an incursion, want to actually go for any kind of influence in Punjab, it will be facing a firewall. And similarly, it cannot lose whosoever is there still in the province, because most of those people actually went to another party, that was PTI, when People's Party was on decline in Punjab. So there is a possibility that we can look at it as a real fight, but I don't think so. Otherwise, governments don't stay put, they fall apart. What I would chalk it down to is essentially their own politics, that they want to keep reviving and stay relevant. But regarding federating units, one concern that I have, and this is about water. After 71, the most divisive issues in this country have been two. One is NFC accord, how monies are going to be distributed between federating units, and second is water. And because Sindh is lower riparian, Sindh keeps on actually complaining that water channels don't carry that much water, because the other provinces actually, the upper riparians actually get the land share. So I think that here too, there will have to be some kind of dialogue, because federalism is important. These concerns are important when it comes to framing of those issues in the parliament by the president. That might be important, but in the end, remember that the office of president can go so far, not beyond that.
Right. Dr. Niaz, I want your take also in terms of the ways that we have seen the PMLN and the Federation actually interacting with different parties and the provinces as well. Irrespective of what has been said by the President, in terms of what we have seen with the opposition, with the PPP and other parties, and of course the provincial leaderships as well, the of course example or the reference that has been made in terms of what the President talked about as unilateral decisions is of course the issue of the canals. But in your perspective, has that been the stance, or has that been the position that the Federation has taken in terms of the way that it goes forward with decision making? Have there been unilateral decisions before? Do you think that that is a true assessment of how you can look at the picture at the moment?
Well, water issues are supposed to go to the CCI, because, they are interprovincial issues, and all interprovincial issues, including water, have to go to the CCI. So, this issue has not been raised at the CCI level. It hasn't been discussed so much in the parliament itself. So, of course, you can say that, it's the majority government, whatever it can do. But on such an issue which is so sensitive, now it's Cholistan canals, earlier it was, Kalabagh Dam, then, there are Pakistan's own issues with, India. So that also reduces the overall quantum of water available for all the provinces. So it's a very sensitive issue, and it's one which is about life and death for small farmers in Sindh. So I think the government should give more attention to these issues, give more thorough analysis, technical analysis, political
CCI session
analysis.
actually hasn't been called in 11 months. Why is that so?
Well, that is the thing, because there are so many contentious issues, and then in that, the PPP will have two voices. It has two provincial, governments, Sindh and Balochistan, and then the third one is with PTI, which is actual real, opposition. So it would be a very noisy. CCI meeting, that be then Punjab and the federal government representatives. So that's why I think the government is a bit hesitant. And then there is the issue of who's involved. in managing that project. So instead of giving it to small scale farmers, it's been given to a large powerful state entity. So that creates its own dynamics, and how what positions PMLN can take. So it's a very dicey situation, and yeah, it can put stress on the federation. There's already a lot of stress in KP, in Balochistan. So you would want to keep Sindh at least on the your right hand side. So I would urge caution, because there are other alternatives available to building canals. There are irrigation options, the drip irrigation. There's the option of tapping underground water below the river beds and so on. So I think the government should look at it, and look at the economic model as well, in terms of giving the land to the landless. There's so many landless people in Pakistan. So give them, so that we have food security, because the plan seems to be to do corporate farming and then export that food for the Gulf states, or at least part of it. So I think the whole model seems quite flawed to me. I think there is a need to revisit it from all angles, and come up with something which is more in line with national interest.
Right, but Dr. Niaz, beyond the water issues as well, I want your perspective in general in terms of the relationship the federation has with the provinces.
Well, as I said, there's tense relationships with PTI, and then if PPP also gets upset, then there'll be two more provinces. So that will be three provinces versus only one province, Punjab, even though it's the biggest province. But from the point of view of CCI and Senate, it's just equality among the provinces. So it could create problems.
Right, Faisal, when we take a look at the ways in which we have seen engagements and calls for dialogue, and the aspect of consensus, or even with the president calling for unity, while of course that is essential, but who's actually going to go around and make sure that that actually happens, when of course it is the parliamentarians of the parliament that is the platform for such political dialogue? Then what is the direction, or whose responsibility or onus or action point this is for that consensus to actually take place?
In an ideal scenario, of course, it is the office of the president himself, who obviously is the president of not only the treasury benches, but he is the president of the opposition benches as well. And at the same time, of course, he is the one who has to ensure that he is putting up his influence to bring all of the political parties together. But the kind of politics we have been seeing for like more than 2 years, of course, in that environment in which we saw that the political parties, of course, they were going to every length to, of course, oppose each other. And in that context, I mean, rest of all the parties, the parties that are sitting in the treasury benches right now, of course, they have the harmony amongst themselves, and consensus is there. That consensus existed. That's why they are having a coalition government right now, and there is a power sharing mechanism which is being applied by this government, and that consensus is there. But at the same time, when we talk about one particular party, and that is PTI, of course, that consensus, though president would always want them to have a sitting with the treasury benches and talk about the consensus, but of course that is not being seen, because that rift from the PTI side is still there. And when would it go and how would it go, that is obviously a big question mark. And to answer that question mark, it requires a sort of the whole scenario needs to be debunked, and what their requirements are, and what do they want. In recent past, of course, the kind of meetups they were having with the treasury benches, in that the kind of demands they had, of course, them demands, they are not acceptable to the treasury benches. And I'm pretty much sure that if president himself president himself would be sitting in there, them demands would never be, of course, accepted by the treasury benches and the presidency itself. So in that whole scenario, of course, I don't see that political consensus building up. But Sana, when it comes to consensus, I have said it in past and would say it again, that at least on economy and on security, these two dimensions, of course, all of the parties, they can be sitting together and forming a consensus. If the political consensus on the other side, like how the governance is being run and who's in power and how they have demands and they are not being met, that is another question. But when it comes to security, fighting against terrorism, and when it comes to economy itself, I think that consensus should be looked after, and that needs to be fixed in Pakistan. And president's office, the kind of president we have, of course, we know that he is always considered as a man of crisis, who can always come up with the solutions. And I expect that if President Zardari himself plays his role in bringing all of the parties, including PTI, on the consensus of economy and fighting against the terrorism, that can be, of course, arranged.
Right. And Farrukh, do you think that the office of the president can actually do that?
Okay, do what?
Can actually build that political consensus that Faisal is referring to?
Right. Well, I actually missed that part. But, when it comes to building consensus, of course, presidency can do it, and then CCI, which is more, more apt body to actually take care of these issues, that could have done this kind of thing. The only problem right now is, Sana, that while I firmly believe in 73 Constitution in its original shape regarding democracy and federalism, and I am a huge believer in federalism, there are concerns on both sides, right? On one side is the concern regarding water, right? If you move from, up north to the south, that is from northern areas to Sindh and then to the ocean, you see how vegetation changes. For example, just go and try this, buy an apricot in Waziristan for that matter. You will get a really juicy, a huge fruit. Keep on traveling downwards, and when you go to Sindh, everything shrinks and shrivels. Why? Because water is there is water scarcity. But on the other side, then the issue of how federating units actually treat their internal equity is also very interesting, because in most cases we know when it comes to PSDP, there is a formula to ensure that development funds, so many go to the federation and so much goes to provinces. When you talk about NFC award, there is a clear formula how much will go to the federation, how much will go to federating units. But when it comes to division within the federating units, for example, certain parts of the same province, the provincial governments are not that equitable. There hasn't been a provincial finance commission that I know of. There hasn't been any ADP, the provincial equivalent of PSDP is also not equitable. And then the problem is that there could have been a Hail Mary in the shape of local governments. So they don't allow local governments to flourish either. In that state, one really worries, although I will always prefer federalism over unitary system, I will always prefer democracy over any kind of authoritarianism. But in the end, when you look at what goes on in this country, one asks how democratic these things are, or federalistic they are on the grassroots level. And then that's why I think we need a deeper debate than what is available either in presidency or, for that matter, CCI.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Niaz, we're going to move on to the next segment and start off with what you said in the beginning regarding economic shock as well. We've spoken about the political shock, but I want your take in terms of what that means in terms of how you're looking at the situation. While, of course, many believed that the rate is going to be changed, we saw, of course, that coming as a surprise. But do you think that that is based on a rationale that is good for the economy, particularly in terms of how they have correlated that with the inflation rate and the fact that perhaps those numbers are based on unsustainable factors?
Well, the first thing is that, there should not have been a shock. If, the state bank was planning not to cut the interest rates this time, it should have prepared the market for that through, various speeches that, the governors make, other deputy governors make here and there, because, the market doesn't like shocks. If, there is a decision and it's communicated ahead in couched language so that the market is prepared, it will accept that decision. But if it comes as a shock, then it sends panic. And that's true for not just Pakistani markets, even the US markets. They don't like shock. So the first thing is, the management of the decision, the communication, there should have been much more preparation. Now, why did that not happen? Because so far, this leadership of State Bank has been quite good at, communicating its intentions beforehand, preparing the market. So one, explanation could be that, this decision did not come from the State Bank, but because, the IMF is in town and they are constantly, liaising with the government and the state bank. So maybe there was pressure from the IMF, which is why, the prior preparation could not be done. It was, just decided in the last 1 or 2 days. Now about the decision itself, the thing is that, interest rate is at 1.5%. Your current account deficit is also fairly under control. The rupee is also under control. So in normal situations at this stage, you would expect more sharp cuts because, now economic stability is, fairly strong now, and then the next step needs to be growth. But the problem in Pakistan is that, economic stability is also very precarious, which could change quite suddenly because of international, issues, oil shocks, etc. And then, what the IMF is suggesting in the talks that are going on for the release of,
Yes.
example, a carbon tax which will be levied on petrol and diesel, and that will send inflation up again, because diesel and petrol is used in almost every product. So if you increase the prices of that, then inflation will go down. Then it's also asking for more taxes. So IMF knows that whatever things it will ask the government to do, that could send inflation up again, which was, even before this, all this was expected to rise a bit in the coming months. So that is one situation. And then the second thing is that, normally if you bring down the interest rate, the money supply expand, people, businesses are more willing to borrow and invest it in industry. But that unfortunately doesn't happen in Pakistan, because we don't have reforms. We don't have much control over what happens to the money supply. It often ends up in the wrong kind of sectors, into increasing imports, into going all into real estate. So it doesn't necessarily flow to the industrial sector that we are looking to rehabilitate, so that it creates jobs. Because inflation has gone down, but inflation going down doesn't mean prices going down. Prices are still increasing, but at a much lower rate. So prices are still high for the people. What they need is growth now, so that they are better paying jobs, so that their purchasing power can catch up with the increased inflation. So but
Right.
that doesn't happen. So if you open the floodgates of the money supply, you might end up in another crisis if imports again increase sharply, if the rupee starts depreciating. So it's an abnormal situation, not what you would do in a more normal economy, which is why you have to be more cautious, even though the inflation rate is so low.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Niaz Mirza, for joining us and being a part of the debate today. Faisal, I want your take on this as well. As Dr. Niaz was saying, perhaps this shouldn't have been a shock. But in terms of the ways that we have seen the State Bank actually move forward with this decision, how are the people viewing it?
Yeah, but Sana, obviously, people are obviously positive about it. The kind of the kind of decisions which were made by the government, I think these are the fruits of that them decisions. And when we talk about the change,
But are the industries happy about this decision?
industry is not that happy, but of course they want more of the concessions in coming days. But when it comes to country getting out of that kind of crisis, the economic crisis which was looming last year and the year before, every year of course there is an improvement, and I think even the industries they understand this. And in coming days, if the production carries on like this and the inflation does not go up, and inflation is controlled, then in that context, of course, I see it getting more and more better. If there is more domestic production, of course, the consumption would see sort of relaxation in terms of not heading towards inflation getting out of control. So in the whole scenario, I think this is the favorable for the current circumstances. For future, of course, it can be made more better, and we just need to wait for a certain time.
Right. Yes, Farrukh, what do you make of it?
Right, Sana, thank you very much for the question, although I think Dr. Saab has done already incredible good job of covering it. But three factors can actually explain what has happened.
Okay.
Number one, IMF in town or IMF in Pakistan, because IMF has traditionally been or recently been averse to very quickly opening up the economy. It is not merely, interest rate cuts. When you cut that, economic activity takes place, imports start happening, and what happens, you end up with balance of payment crisis, because dollar keeps on leaving the country because of the inherent imbalance in our imports and exports. The second one is Donald Trump in Washington, because of and the third one is very closely connected to it, and that is the double standards or intellectual dishonesty of international economic experts, right? How so? Because President Donald Trump is trying to fix his own country's economy, and he keeps on talking about tariffs. But there are people who, of course, President Trump now calls them globalists. So those globalists actually keep on talking about inflation increasing rapidly all over the world and the economy being destroyed, simultaneously talking about inflation and then also recession. So this must be the closest you have got to Schrodinger's cat, right? Which is alive and dead simultaneously. That's why hypocrisy. But when you talk about the possibility of tariff, of course, there is a chance that there might be an international inflationary super cycle, and because of that, also it is prudent not to open economy that quickly. So that's why I think that it was for the best that State Bank has been prudent rather than getting carried away and keeping on cutting this further. But when you talk about this month also, it could also have something to do with this month, because inflation usually rises in this month of Ramzan too.
Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us and being a part of the debate. As always, that's all that we have time for. We'll now see you tomorrow.